is on. Anyway, so again, we are looking at Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. We left off last class looking at Alexander Pope and his mock epic, The Rape of the Lock, which was suitably unheroic in its depiction and in its subject matter. This is the age of reason, as we've said. It's also an age of satire. Satire is really the dominant mode of writing in the age, or at least insofar as there is a distinction to be found, it is in that. As I said, you can talk about it as the neoclassical era as well, and that's architecturally and so forth. And in Pope, there's a return to the translations of the epic. It's a very great interest in the classical era, but it's also the age of the Enlightenment and the age of reason and the advance of human society that is said to come with the embrace of reason. And with that in the background, that's an important background for Swift's Modest Proposal, because Swift is addressing an audience that is presumed to be enlightened in their attitudes towards basically everything, and which is bringing about an advance in some way in their civilization upon those of past eras. So when he writes this, and let me say a bit about him here. Let me see if I can find this in my, no, it's not even there. Yeah, I won't bother with that. Swift is writing to an audience that he presumes to, or they presume to be enlightened and Christian and superior to those of the past. He's also writing as a clergyman. I should say that as well. Jonathan Swift is a clergyman. He's Irish, part of the Church of England, but in the those areas of Ireland that were conquered by Oliver Cromwell and were part of the affiliation with the British Crown. And so when he writes this, he's also writing as somebody whose audience is expecting certain things from him. Like you would not expect from a clergyman anything like a proposal, as it turns out, that they eat the small children of the Irish that are proposing or creating such a problem. Let me talk about a little bit about the problem. We've already, in terms of the backdrop, we looked at the English Civil War as the context for Milton's Paradise Lost. Charles I, who was deposed and then executed by the Oliver Cromwell and the Roundheads, and they brought in a Republican government, Puritan in its emphasis, collapsed. Charles II, his son who'd gone into exile, came back from France, restored the monarchy to Britain, but brought back with it strong Roman Catholic emphases, which were detestable to the English. So just because the government of Cromwell fell doesn't mean that the religious sensibilities went away. They didn't go away. So when Charles II came back, he was wildly unpopular, even though he was legitimate, and it wasn't long before when he was, there was a glorious revolution which came about, and under William and Mary, in a sort of a bloodless revolution. And that has left us with the legacy of what we now have as the United Kingdom of England and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the three united under one government, and it's a Protestant one, in which the Queen is the head of the Church of England, and the United Kingdom itself is, roughly speaking, Protestant. And we saw that last time with Pope. That meant that if you were Roman Catholic, that excluded you from power and influence. You couldn't even go to the universities. That still left a problem. So on the one hand, there's a political resolution that's taken place there. There's now peace and order, and the sort of glorious revolution that I spoke about happened without any blood being shed. So that's good. There's political stability. On the other hand, you still have the problem of the dissenters in their ranks, and the chief of those are in Ireland, which is still predominantly Roman Catholic. Now, they were brought under the British thumb, as it were, when Cromwell went and suppressed a rebellion in the ranks of the Irish. The Irish rebelled against Cromwell and his government, and the threat for Cromwell was that there would be a Catholic invasion that would seek to disestablish the Republican government. So there was the threat from continental Europe on the one hand, Spain and France in particular, but then off their own flank in Ireland there was a huge strongly Roman Catholic populace that was also threatening to invade. So this is a political threat. And so Cromwell went across the Irish Sea and put it down quite brutally, the rebellion. Not that it was a rebellion per se, but the threat of invasion. So he went across the Irish Sea, defeated the Irish army, and brought it under British subjection, and had been till this day, to some degree, at least until the 20th century. And then the Republic got divided from Northern Ireland, which is how it currently stands. Cromwell also marched into Scotland, by the way, and put the Presbyterians down, because they insisted that the new Republican government be also Presbyterian. It's not enough that they be not Roman Catholic, they have to be Presbyterian, not Anglicans. Cromwell said, we're not going to have that. We will have some freedom here. You can be any stripe of Protestant. You can be a Baptist, you can be Reformed, you can be a Presbyterian, you can be Free Church, whatever. We're not going to insist on one form of church government. The Scots disagreed. The Scots got their heads cracked by Cromwell. So Cromwell did this, and the legacy of this, however, is we have England and Ireland and Scotland. So if this is London here, what a terrible map. And this is the Scottish border, and I don't know, you've got Edinburgh up here maybe. And then over here we've got Ireland, with Dublin somewhere around here. And Jonathan Swift, coming from Dublin, that's where his parish is. But he's part of the English aristocracy that has been left in Ireland to make sure that that Ireland does not rise up against the British Crown again. So there's been English aristocrats that have been left in various counties here, so they're under more or less English rule. So there are English aristocrats, there's the Church of England, and then there's the overwhelming majority of the population, which is Roman Catholic. And their problem that Swift is addressing here is that Roman Catholic Ireland is poor. It's dirt poor. Suffering from famines. Not yet the famous potato famine, that will come later. And furthermore, they remain a political threat, because England, Scotland, United Kingdom is Protestant, and the wars of religion are to some degree in the past, but the threat remains there that a Catholic insurgency could happen and disestablish or overthrow the British government. So this is a problem, and they are breeding, to use the phrase, like rabbits. It's intentionally pejorative. They're having too many children, and so they have this problem. There's the problem of religious threat and a political threat that comes with it, because there's a pretender in Spain who, when we say pretender, he has pretensions to legitimate claim to the British crown, and he's threatening, or at least talking about the possibility of claiming the British crown through his historical lineage, and he has a population of co-religionists in Ireland that he might appeal to help him disestablish the British monarchy. So there are two threats. One is the terrible impoverishment of the Irish people, but the other is political insurrection in their ranks. And Pope is writing as an Anglican clergyman from Dublin, often over here as well. Let's say London, gosh, it's at least around here. It's not so all over that. So that's the background there. It is called a modest proposal. This is ironic. The title is ironic. You know what I mean by irony? Mm-hmm. Irony used to be a part of the Canadian way of talking. It no longer is. It's a common way of people speaking, but I have found that probably because of immigration, irony is never understood anymore. Because irony, when you say one thing, you mean the opposite. And if you're new to the language, for somebody to say this and mean the opposite is impossible. You have to say what you mean, and you can't mean something other than what you say without them thinking that you're trying to cheat them or deceive them or whatever. So there's no subtlety, it's just total misunderstanding. But irony is the deliberate saying of one thing and meaning another. So if a modest proposal, it's a highly immodest proposal. There's nothing modest about it. Understatement is another way of putting it, for which the British or the English are particularly famous. So, what was the weather like in Florida? Not bad. Understatement. It was 30 degrees the whole time. Understatement. Not bad. Would you say that? You would. It doesn't translate in other languages. If you want to say good, say good. You don't say not bad. When I was in Germany and speaking German there, I used to take English phrases and translate them into German. They never worked. It's like not bad. I say, well, how are you doing? Well, not bad. And they say, why would you not just say good? What's wrong with you? Wow. I did say that. Okay. It's just understatement, right? So that irony is a part of this proposal, and you have to understand that. A larger part, however, is that it is satirical. Let me talk about that for a minute. What we mean by satire. And what satire depends upon in order to function. Because in our day, there are lots of journals and programs that purport to be satirical. What do you understand by satirical, if anything? Does it mean anything to you, satire? No? Sure. No.
It's almost a way to open people's eyes to find a different truth in a way. You are somewhat being ironic and, I think the word, to just make people, it almost implies that people have knowledge of what is right and wrong, so that they can see your satire and know if he's just joking.
That's very good. I think there's some parts of what you said that are particularly helpful, which is that people have to have an intuitive sense of what right and wrong are in order for satire to function. They have to know what right is and what wrong is. Otherwise, satire does not function at all. So if everything's up for negotiation, and there is no truth at all, or truth is a matter of perspective, or part of your point of view, then satire can't not function. There has to be a common ground, a common understanding of what constitutes right and wrong for satire to function. So the most famous satirist that you will know and may not have considered as a satirist is Jesus. Jesus, when he calls the Pharisees whitewashed sepulchres, is employing satire. A sepulcher is where you inter dead bones. White on the outside, death in the middle. And yet they purport to be teachers of Israel, the people of God, bringing the word of the living God to people, and yet they are rotten and dead inside, and they just appear white on the outside. So when he does this, he's ripping into them. It's not friendly language, to put it mildly. But satire has that aspect of the purpose of satire is not simply to rip them. That's sarcasm. So let's distinguish satire from sarcasm. The word sarcasm literally is the tearing of the flesh, from sarx here in Greek. Flesh. Flex. Flesh. So it's the X. To be sarcastic is to take a bite out of somebody. You're literally tearing their flesh. So it's only negative. It has no redemptive purpose. Whereas satire is there to certainly attack someone, but the purpose of it is to call them to act rightly. Jesus is not sarcastic. He is satiric. Now, the form of the satire, because there are various forms. The form that Swift is writing in here, and I believe that Jesus himself also employs, is Juvenalian satire. And this is after a Roman author by the name of Juvenal. And it's particularly tough and confrontational. Not very urbane. It's savage stuff. And it surprises people when they note that Jesus employs satire, because it's not something that you notice amongst Christians these days. Do Christians ever speak in satiric terms anymore? Do they really? Did you hear that amongst Christian leaders, that they would use, like, if we're to model ourselves on Jesus, do we ever speak with false teachers in satiric terms? I don't see it. Yes?
Another, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, I thought with satire, would you also say it's using the truth to poke at people so that they're kind of stirred and
Yes.
hopefully turning toward the truth?
The point of punching them in the nose and offending them is to get them to repent, to turn around, to stop acting as they are. Sometimes you can use it through the means of a story. Jesus teaches in parables. This is a very subtle way of talking about how God relates, and he'll talk about the parable of the prodigal son. This is a story of illustrating what God is like. Or the parable of the lost sheep, or the coin, or the talents. These are various means of teaching. Jesus is teaching there. So that's one means of connecting to people. But these people purport, that is, the Pharisees claim to be teachers, and they ought to know better. And they don't, so they get a different mode of discourse. And the mode of discourse that they get is satire. Very blunt and very tough and uncompromising. There's no room for misunderstanding there. Where does Jesus stand in relation to the Pharisees? They are their enemies. And they're trying to be friends. They're trying to trick him and act as if they were his friends. And he sees right through the hypocrisy, which is also what he calls them, by the way. You hypocrites. A hypocrite, by the way, is an actor. Under the judgment, the actors, that's somebody behind a mask. Jesus probably had in mind the Roman and Greek theater where they wore masks on stage. You look like you got a smiling face on the outside, and I know you got a snarl underneath that. This is you're acting like you're my friends. You're not my friends. Let's get rid of the pretensions. Modest proposal, on the other hand, it is written in Juvenalian satire. It nonetheless has an irony to it, which is not there in Jesus. Jesus is not ironic when he's speaking of them. He's using satire without irony. Swift is employing both satire and irony. The context is part of what will allow us to see the irony in it. The satire comes from the proposal. It's a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. Well, this sounds entirely reasonable. Why would you not want this to happen? It sounds like something that a clergyman would propose. Right? He wants the people to be treated better and to improve their lot in life, to be treated like image bearers of God. So we're all ears. So what is the proposal? I'll read a little bit of it, and then let me comment on this. So I've given you a bit of the backdrop. It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags, and importuning every passenger for an alms, so begging. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work or leave their dear native country to fight for the pretender in Spain or sell themselves to the Barbados. Now, this is happening as well. Now, we're aware of the African slave trade. There was also an Irish slave trade. It happened in North America. It happened in the Barbados as well. The Irish were also sold into slavery, a little lesser known. It's still happening. Out of desperation, selling themselves, human trafficking. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms or on the backs or on the heels of their mothers and frequently of their fathers is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance. And therefore, whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound and useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. So that's how it begins. It begins with presenting a problem, and it's a problem that will be on the lips of probably everyone who has any concern about British public affairs, who has any concern for the poor, and he is assuming a Christian audience, of course. I mean, he's writing as, I believe he's the dean of the cathedral in Dublin. Not 100% sure of that, but certainly connected with that. Not exactly sure the position. Let's see here, 289. And as a consequence of that, he is expecting his audience will immediately be supportive of his proposal because he's proposing to solve a problem that everyone will recognize as a problem, first of all. And he doesn't need to persuade them that this is the case because nobody wants children to be without food or without clothes and their mothers to be begging and them forcing to sell themselves into slavery or to have to work for the pretender in Spain who's a threat to the United Kingdom. He's a political threat. So all of these are real problems and they need to be solved, and he's going to propose a solution to the problem. So we're all ears. And note, it's a modest proposal. And he says, but my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It is of a much greater extent, and shall take in the whole number of infants at a certain age, who are born of parents in effect as little able to support them as those who demand our charity in the streets. Aha. This is an ambitious man then. He's not only going to solve one problem, he's going to solve all the political problems of children in his day. And furthermore, as to my own part, having turned my thoughts for many years upon this important subject and maturely weighed the several schemes of other projectors, I have always found them grossly mistaken in their computation. Let me just stop there with that word, computation. He's now appealing to statistics and measurable things. And this is what's going to make his argument superior to theirs. He will be able to quantify it. Again, using the rationale and the logic of empirical verification. I can give you the statistics. I only draw that to your attention because it's so common in our day for people to quote statistics to support public policy decisions that we don't bat an eye. But in their age, this is a new thing, to talk about the good of public policy in terms of measurables, as they say these days. Numbers, statistics, social studies. It was Winston Churchill who, I think, in being quoted these statistics to recommend certain policies, said there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, in that order of how bad they were. There are lies, there are damned lies, and then there are statistics. The statistics can justify almost everything. The contempt that Churchill demonstrated for statistics is one that people have learned over the course of time, that the statistics are a means to make an argument appear to be good when in fact it's missing the point. And this is perhaps one of the first and most important instances of that. Yes, question?
When he says other projectors, does he mean like planners or people who are trying to predict the future?
He's probably responding to Daniel Defoe's The Generous Projector, but there are other authors writing in and around the same time. So there are others that are writing on this, sometimes satirically, sometimes seriously, but all of the political problem that I mentioned would be part of common parlance in political circles. What are we going to do about the Irish problem? And the Irish problem has many prongs. One, they're poor. Two, they're Catholic. Three, not only are they poor and Catholic, our enemy is Catholic, and they're not the enemy per se, but the real enemy is in Spain, and he has a potent political force that not that long ago sought to invade England. The Spanish Armada it failed, but there's a historic antipathy between the two nations. So that's part of the Irish problem. And what do we do with this? But he's only made a brief reference here to the pretender in Spain. That's just there. That's not the main point. The main point is the Christian point, or the apparently Christian point, of what are we going to do about these poor kids and their parents and this cycle of poverty. It's almost an appeal for social justice, actually. That's how it would be spoken of these days. There's a social injustice here, and we're going to rectify that injustice. How is that going to happen? And he adds a further element of his plan, which he's already said is going to render it superior. Now he's bringing the benefits before he's even proposed the solution. And the reason he does that is he makes it sound so attractive that you're ready to jump on the proposal. Because he says, there is likewise another advantage in my scheme, that it will prevent those voluntary abortions. Note that he concludes, and we should conclude, that abortion is considered to be a form of murder. And the horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children. Furthermore, infanticide. Alas, too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes. I doubt more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move tears and pity in the most savage and inhuman breast. But note that he's not condemning the murderers, he's condemning the conditions that put them in a position where they're willing to do that because of the terrible expense. So he's showing sympathy for their cause. He's not condemning the moms or the parents. He's condemning the situation that they've been put in. So there's an economic argument. So he's addressing the root cause, as it were, or as it's called in political discourse in our day. Let's get at the root cause of this, which is poverty. So how will we solve the problem of poverty? Well, now he comes to it. The number of souls in this kingdom. By the way, the reference to people as souls is very common in the English language, at least in this period. And it would have been all the way up into the 20th century. It's becoming less common now, but it's basically identical, one for the other. A human being, a metaphor for that, or a synonym, is a soul. So a car, there was an airplane crash and 100 souls were lost. Would have once been said. You don't hear that anymore. 100 lives were lost, or 100 people died, but you wouldn't hear 100 souls were lost. But in his day, you would say this, and it draws in particular attention the eternal state of a person. A soul is someone in relation to God. So are the others, but it has that particular connotation, right? people concerned about souls. Christians are concerned with souls. So the number of souls in this kingdom, speaking as a clergyman, being usually reckoned 1.5 million, of these I calculate, note the mathematical language, rational. There may be about 200,000 couple whose wives are breeders. Now, I drew your attention to the word souls. That's a very Christian term. A reference to women as breeders is not a very Christian term. What would you refer to as breeders? Anyone from a farm here?
You breeders, like when you have an animal and you like have to, well, you breed it, so you like have to make it have.
You talk about it as a breeder, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You, like,
it's just a
breed
term.
A cow, like,
Right,
breed-
but this is a
yeah.
breeder, right?
So that's like talking as a human, so like as an animal.
It's
like-
referring to a function.
Yeah.
And so, on the one hand, referring to the people as souls is humanizing them and seeing something very distinctive about them. It's the image of God in them, really. It's that aspect in relation to God. But now, referring to them as breeders is doing the exact opposite.
He's like contradicting himself.
Yeah, well, he's creating a tension there for sure.
Yeah.
You can't speak of them as souls on the one hand and then speak of them as breeders on the other. But by doing that, he's already probably talking about people as subhuman in the way that his contemporaries are. But you can already note the tension just in his choice of vocabulary. He'll further emphasize this because he'll speak of the mothers as having a dam. A uterus that women don't have dams. It's a term only used of animals. In some languages, like in German, it's really interesting. They have words that animals eating is fressen, whereas a person eating is essen, but animals fress, and people ess. So it's a different word entirely for animals eating people. And you think, well, eating's the same. Yeah, but they have a different word for it. Same here in English. Like, what's the difference between a woman's uterus and an animal's uterus? A uterus is a uterus. We have different words for it. And so if you confuse the two, even though you might say they're synonyms, yes, but they have different connotations, and now the connotations are entirely degrading. You're speaking of people as animals. As soon as you can start speaking of people in terms that are less human, you dehumanize them. Now he's doing something here that will become very common in totalitarian regimes. Start talking about people in terms that equate them with animals. And it's setting up what will soon be proposed, that what you can do with people, or what you can do with animals, you can also do with people. But back to the phrase. I calculate there may be about 200,000 couples whose wives are breeders, from which number I subtract 30,000 couples who are able to maintain their own children. Oh, there are 1.5 million and 30,000 of them are able to maintain their own children. That's not a good state. But he's being very statistical here. Although I apprehend there cannot be so many under the present distresses of the kingdom. But this being granted, there will remain 170,000 breeders. I again subtract 50,000 for those women who miscarry. Now note, by doing this, he's addressing other ills that arise out of this. So from the situation of poverty, miscarriages happen to this day. It happens quite frequently, actually. It's not much talked about, but miscarriages happen. But he's just passing it over as if it were something with no moral significance. Whereas if you have a miscarriage, you've lost a child, and it can really hit people. If you've ever had any involvement in people's lives who've had miscarriages, sometimes it hits them very hard, and they never get over it, actually. Other people miscarry, and it doesn't bother them. But, and there's no right and wrong there, but there is a sense that this is not just another thing. It's not like, a regular aspect of physical existence, a miscarriage. So he subtracts 50,000 for women who miscarry, or whose children die by accident or disease within the year. So now he's down to 120. There only remain 120,000 children of poor parents annually born. The question, therefore, is how this number shall be reared and provided for, which, as I've already said, under the present situation of affairs is utterly impossible by all the methods hitherto proposed. For we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture, we neither build houses, I mean in the country. This is a little jab because they're building them in Dublin, the city for the wealthy, but they're not building it in the countryside. Nor cultivate land. By the way, they could do all these things. And one of the jobs here is at the wealthy aristocracy that are sitting on huge estates that they're not actually utilizing for agriculture. They're just sitting on the land and not employing them and employing people to feed them. He says we can't do this. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing until they arrive at 6 years old, except when they are of towardly parts. Well, I mean, if they're really adept little critters, they might be able to steal before they're 6, but normally you have to wait till they're 6, and then they can earn a living through stealing. Note that I use the word critters. That's not his word. It's me just getting into the spirit of things here. Although I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time they can, however, be properly looked upon only as probationers, because they're eventually going to go back to their natural way of life, which is stealing. You know, the Irish, you know what they're like. Note that is anyone Irish here? Sorry. Remember, he's an Irishman himself. But he's speaking as part of the English aristocracy, and he's speaking to them, and there's an element of tongue-in-cheek here. He's saying this, and they're sort of chuckling and thinking, oh, he's not that serious here. So at this point, it's not open attack. He's getting them alongside. He's being humorous. And as he says, as I've been informed by a principal gentleman in the county of Cavan, who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in a part of the kingdom so renowned for the quickest proficiency in that art. I guess Cavan is renowned for thieves. But now he gets to his point. I am assured by our merchants that a boy or a girl before 12 years old is no saleable commodity. You can't sell them into slavery. They're no good. They're not strong enough. There's no point in selling people before they're 12. And even when they come to this age, they will not yield above 3 pounds finance, or 3.5 pounds a crown at most, on the exchange. So he's now addressing the fact that there is a slave trade going on in their midst, which everyone, Christian, ought to be scandalized by. His audience ought to realize that this also is a problem. But note what he's doing now is he's talking about facts and separating them from values. So there's no value judgment. He's now just talking to them purely factual terms. When he started talking about souls as breeders, and he's talking about calculations, and now he's moving on to talking about making money off of them by selling them as commodities. He's taken value judgments wholly out of the equation. Why has he done so? Because his audience is talking about the Irish problem as if the Irish problem were not human beings. They're just a threat to them and their established privileges and their political privileges. But by not saying that explicitly, he's saying it implicitly, and it's far stronger. Anyway, let me move on. Which cannot turn to account either to the parents or kingdom, the charge of nutriment and rags having been at least 4 times that value. So there's no point in raising them up to be 12 and then selling them for 3 pounds when it will have cost 4 times as much to feed them to that point. So we're losing money every year. So there's no point in proposing we fatten them up and take care of them until they're 12. That's not a good solution, financially speaking. At this point, everyone's ought to be going, Okay, so you're dismissing it because it's economically unfeasible. Yes. Well, that ought to tip you off that something very bad is about to be proposed. I shall now, therefore, humbly propose my own thoughts, which are scandalous, by the way, but he says he's going to do humbly, which I hope will not be liable to the least objection. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance. Oh, blame it on the Americans, yes. It wasn't his thought, it was an American. Well, you know what the Americans are like. They're thrifty, they're quick, they're good businessmen. That a young healthy child, well nourished, is at 1 year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout. Note that he uses the word it, that it. Not a boy child or a female child, not a girl or a boy, but it, the healthy child. He's called it an it, which is a thing. He's depersonified them by calling them its. Another way of depersonifying people, by the way, is to call them theys. But never mind. Which we do habitually in our day. I'll have you note. You will never meet a person who's not a male or a female. Because we're either a he or a she, and that's what a person is. An it is what we refer to as a thing. That's basic grammar. A they is a circumlocution for avoiding the he or a she. But you talk about they as things as well. So there's a depersonification that goes on as soon as you avoid the word he or she. I've been on this for years. But yes.
If they is a plural.
Third person plural.
Yes, but if they is a personal.
So is it. They're all personal pronouns.
No, but it is by definition not speaking of persons. They is just the plural form. So how is that the same depersonification?
Well, because first of all, a singular person is only a singular ever person. So it's a category mistake, first of all. So if I can speak of an individual person as a, he or a she, I'm identifying them as either male or female individuals. I can't refer to one of them as a they. That's a category mistake. I'm referring to an individual as a plural, right? A singular as a plural. That doesn't work.
But is that still a depersonification?
Well, it is. It is in the sense that to be a person is to be an individual. It's not to be a part of a collective or a group. It's not to be a part of an identity group, as identity group politics will see us, by our skin color or by our gender or by our whatever. That's seeing you as a part of a group. Then you can refer to they, us as a they. But you can't refer to persons as theys. Because persons, every person is unique, not just, and the uniqueness is seen in the fact that even though you have one person here and one person there, and they're both persons, what makes them distinct is what we see in the male-femaleness there. Anyway, but I don't want to get too far off topic on that, but I do think that part of contemporary discourse and political correct vocabulary is to depersonalize people. And it's so common that we don't even notice it. But that's my own take on the modest proposal. I won't go further on that. But it's immediately conveying the impression that there's no actual distinction between a person and a thing. In singular, we can see it. In plural, we can't. So I've got a cat. That's it. I got a whole pile of cats, a whole bunch of them. We can speak of them as they. Right? There they are. That's correct. There's no objection. There's the cat. There it is. Or you can say he or she if you want. But that's actually personification. You're calling a cat as if a cat were a person. Yeah. Cats are not he or she. Cats are its. They may be male or female. That's not the same thing as personhood. A person is somebody who bears the image of God. Cats don't. But that's a theological point. But Swift is aware of this point, and it's a key point. He is now speaking of the children as its, and thereby rendering them things. As soon as he can call them things, then it also fits with his idea of quantifying them, making them numbers, talking about the cost-benefit analysis of the proposal, which is what he's about to do. And now the modest proposal is to solve the problem. What was the problem? What's the root cause of the problem? He's identified it at the outset. It's an economic problem. They're poor. The root cause of the problem is poverty, says Swift. By the way, he's not right. The root cause of the problem is not poverty. The root cause of the problem is sin. But he knows that. And his audience ought to know it. And his audience is going to know it because of the nature of the modest proposal. It's so scandalous that it will bring to their eyes their own sinful attitude towards the Irish. They look upon them as not other human beings who are suffering, who are doing bad things, but as mouths to feed, as political threats, as things and not as persons, equal image bearers of God. That's the problem. The financial problem is a bit of a smokescreen. That just comes with it. But he says, I do therefore humbly offer it to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, this is long before computers, but he's talking about that language, 20,000 may be reserved for breed. Okay, so there's the breed animals, right? So 20,000 are reserved. All they do is breed. Whereof only 1/4 part to be males, which is more than we allow to sheep, black cattle, or swine. And my reason is that these children are seldom the fruits of marriage. So that now he's addressing another problem in Ireland. There's a lot of children outside of wedlock. And he says, a circumstance not much regarded by our savages. Now he's speaking of them as savages. Subhuman, again. Therefore, one male will be sufficient to serve 4 females. Now again, agricultural language, to serve. Service a female. That the remaining 100,000 may at 1 year old be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune through the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month, so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or the hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt, will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. I have reckoned upon a medium that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds. Boy, these are big babies. And in a solar year, if tolerably nursed, increaseth to 28 pounds. Yeah, wow. I grant this food will be somewhat dear. That is expensive. And therefore very proper for landlords. Now here's one of the savage points. Who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. So there's the first underhanded, savage satire.
Say it again, sorry.
Well, I've just read it from this. It's very proper for the landlords who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. So he's accusing the landlords of already consuming the adults of Ireland, effectively eating them alive. They may be there, and they may be complaining about the problem of the Irish, but the real problem for the Irish is the English, who have no concern for their fellow human beings because they're Irish and they're Catholics. Ugh, false religion. Note that the satire is savage here. He's saying you're already eating them alive. So because of that, you have a relationship of eating people alive. Well, then now you get to have the kids too, and you're wealthy, so you'll be able to afford it. So the object of attack here is the wealthy English aristocracy in Ireland, which are his fellow Christian English countrymen. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year. Because people have babies all over they don't just have them in the spring, right? Animals come the spring, it's mating season. That's when animals have their children. It's in springtime when the winter breaks. People can have babies all year round. Well, it's much more economic then. I mean, you can always have a ready supply of infant flesh. You don't have to wait, right? It's fantastic. Will be in season throughout the year, but more plentifully in March, and a little before and after, for we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician. Nobody always pushes on another nationality who comes up with these things. That fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than any other season. What happens during the season of Lent? You're supposed to give up food, but you're also supposed to give up sex. And so at the end of Lent, there we go. So 9 months after Lent's over, there's a sudden proliferation of babies. So now we know. The markets will be glutted, more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of papists among us. Religious advantage. Okay, so now what is he speaking? He's talking about religious, using religious terminology void of any Christian conviction at all. Right? He's speaking of the Roman Catholic Irish as animals, as papists, so false religionists, and therefore a threat, but at the same time they're dehumanizing them. So this is a savage Christian satire of a Christian aristocracy. Now I put on one of the overheads here that there is a famous illustration here from and a precedent which we may find that Swift was aware of, which is the apology of Tertullian. And I wonder if I've got the intro here. But I'll just say this briefly. Tertullian is one of the church fathers, and he wrote an apology which was satirizing the early Christian persecution of Christians. So this is one of the church fathers. He wrote a satire, again along the lines of a Juvenalian satire, but he wrote it to the Romans to bring to mind how inhumanely they were treating Christians. So there it was used by a Christian to a pagan audience. Swift is writing a same sort of thing to a Christian audience. And what is he doing by analogy? He's suggesting they're more pagan than the Romans. So the thrust of Tertullian's apology is that the Romans are treating the Christians as subhuman. That's the gist of Tertullian's apology, which is his defense of Christians. It's to protect the Christian faith. Same thing's happening here, except, again, what was Tertullian's audience was the Roman Empire, who were pagans, whereas Swift's audience are the English Anglican aristocracy. Yes?
How can you spell that?
Tertullian? Mm-hmm. From which we get the word apologetics. It's not saying sorry, it's a defense. And what is he doing? He's defending the Christians. That's what apologetics means. It's a defense of the Christian faith. And there's an irony to Swift's use of sarcasm, by the way. So I said sarcasm is the tearing of the flesh, but he's proposing the tearing of the flesh. And he's proposing that this is what the English aristocrats in Ireland are already doing. They're eating the parents. So why not now just eat the babies? But there are advantages to this besides these, and he's not ignored these. A very worthy person, a true lover of his country, and whose virtues I highly esteem, was lately pleased in discoursing on this matter to offer a refinement upon my scheme. Where is it? There it is. He said that many gentlemen of this kingdom, having of late destroyed their deer, he conceived that the want of venison might be well supplied by the bodies of young lads and maidens, not exceeding 14 years of age, nor under 12. So great a number of both sexes in every country being now ready to starve for want of work and service. Now, he's not criticizing that, but he's underhandedly doing so. They're on the verge of starvation because they don't have any work to do. Well, why don't they have any work to do? Because the landlords won't employ them. They just sit on the lands. And these to be disposed of by their parents, if alive or otherwise by their nearest relations, but with due deference to so excellent a friend and so deserving a patriot, I cannot be altogether in his sentiments. For as to the males, my American acquaintance assured me from frequent experience that their flesh was generally tough and lean like that of our schoolboys by continual exercise, and their taste disagreeable, and to fatten them would not answer the charge. Then as to the females, it would, I think, with humble submission, be a loss to the public, because they soon would become breeders themselves. So this is another an argument against letting them grow up to be later. I mean, if you let them grow up, by the time they're close to 12, well, they can be breeders themselves, and you put them to use, make more money. And letting the boys grow up, well, then they get bigger and bigger, but the flesh gets tough, so they're not very saleable then. Note the objections are all economic objections, or they're objections about the goods being sold. They're not objections about the moral status. By not addressing directly the moral status, everyone who has a human soul is saying, but you can't do this. This is appalling. So that the very fact that it lies in the background, this is the irony. He says this, he means that. He means to bring to our attention the moral atrocity of even considering people as things, people as objects to be sold, as things to be exploited, as human resources. Even that phrase, human resources, every company has an HR department. If you think about it, there's something appalling about it. Human resources, it's the same sort of thing. You're talking about people as things to be managed. I'm not saying that there's an analogy between slavery and human resources, but I'm saying that the language itself is a little bit leaning in that direction. Yes?
Would human relations be like the same then, you think? Or like relations as in like, because companies have like human relations, like teams and things.
They do? HR?
Yeah.
Yes,
or, like,
I guess they do.
churches and things like that.
Yes. Human relations doesn't seem to have the same derogatory, like human resources. Resources you can think of as...
Think of like a farm, like a...
Yeah, so you can talk about, well, what sort of resources do you have, and then you can put them all alongside one another. Well, we've got the farm itself, we've got the barn, we've got the whatever, and then you can list them all alongside one another, and there's an equivalence being drawn between them. Well, that's my point. Whereas human relations, those are the relations between humans, so you're still preserving their humanity there. So as long as you preserve the distinction between people and other things, then you've not dehumanized them. But as soon as you see them as one resource like another, then you have to some degree. But that goes with quantifying them, and to some degree, it goes with not with treating them with equality. And this is part of the problem here, is drawing an equivalence between all things and losing the distinctiveness. Treating facts as if there were no values to them, which is something David Hume will encouraged, by the way, the fact-value distinction, and will grow throughout the Enlightenment period and to this very day. But that's the problem with that, is that these the females, if they start to get older, that they're going to become breeders soon, so that doesn't make any sense. But then he has another proposal. Some persons of a desponding spirit are in great concern about the vast number of poor people who are aged, diseased, or maimed, and I have been desired to employ my thoughts that what course may be taken to ease the nation of so grievous an encumbrance. But I'm not in the least pain upon that matter, because it is very well known that they are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine and filth and vermin as fast as can be reasonably expected. Do you get that last little bit? I'm not concerned about that. They're dying as quickly as we can reasonably expect them. In other words, the problem's being solved. The problem is not that they're diseased and they're poor and they're maimed. That's not the problem. The problem is they're not dying off quickly enough. So he's missed the point. He's deliberately missed the point. But what are the advantages? Now he's going to list them, and he's going to list them, and he's going to enumerate them. Note this: firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly. This is also part of the stylistic attack on the Enlightenment through satire, is numbering points, bullet points, if you will, is a way of reducing everything to numbers, to quantities, without recognizing the value of things. And it starts with not valuing people. But he's going to enumerate the advantages to this. For first, as I've already observed, it would greatly lessen the number of papists with whom we are yearly overrun, being the principal breeders of the nation, as well as our most dangerous enemies, and who stay at home on purpose. Those dastardly villains. They stay at home on purpose, with a design to deliver the kingdom to the pretender, hoping to take their advantage by the absence of so many good Protestants. So the Protestants get up and they leave. That's because they have the means to do so. Never mind. Who have chosen rather to leave their country than stay at home and pay tithes against their conscience to an idolatrous episcopal curate. Secondly, the poorer tenants will have something valuable of their own, because this is part of the proposal, which by law they may be liable to distress and help to pay their landlord's rent, because they're going to pay the mothers to breed the children to the age of a year and then give the money for them. So now they have an income. He solved the financial problem. They're not going to be poor anymore. They can sell their babies. It's problem solved. Check. And they can pay their landlord's rent with it. Great. So the landlords can make more money and eat the babies. Their corn and cattle being already seized and money a thing unknown. Note that in the latter bit, he finally gets to the real issue that he's addressing. They've already taken all of the Irish Catholics have no property at all. They have nothing. They don't have corn. They don't have cattle. They have no money. Why? Because the landlords have robbed them blind. They've taken everything away from them. As he says, they're devouring them alive. Now they can pay the rent, he's suggesting. He's identifying the nature of the problem there. Thirdly, whereas the maintenance of 100,000 children from 2 years old and upwards cannot be computed at less than 10 shillings apiece per annum, the nation's stock will be thereby increased 50,000 pounds per annum, besides the profit of a new dish introduced to the tables of all gentlemen of fortune in the kingdom, who have any refinement in taste. And the money will circulate among ourselves, the goods being entirely of our own growth and manufacture. Okay, so now we're talking about people as manufactured goods. Point. When the Bible talks about having children, what's the term it uses? The term for having children. Yes. It's be fruitful, multiply, and so forth. Begetting. Old language, right? Nobody uses this anymore. To beget. Or to procreate. We don't use this word at all anymore. Sometimes people talk about procreation, but not usually. What word do we use for having children in our day? In your sex ed classes, what would they use? Birth.
Say like getting pregnant, fertilizing eggs.
Go ahead. Make babies.
Intercourse? Is that the word you're looking for?
I'm not looking for that word, no. Reproduction. What does the word reproduction have in common between people and other things? It's the same word. It's reproduction. It's the same thing again and again, but the begetting is not the same thing. If I have children, my children are not the same as me. They're unique individuals. They're from me. They're in some sense a part of me, but they're also distinct individual beings. Begetting, procreating had a sense of that distinct uniqueness. Reproduction suggests the same thing over and over and over. This is language that's amenable to seeing people as things. It's no different. I'm not saying it's inherently wrong. I'm just saying there's something, it's no longer unique, and there's something dehumanizing about the very term. You can also reproduce by having children, or you can artificially reproduce. And you can use the same language. It's taken the human factor out of the equation. So what Swift is doing here, interestingly, through this use of language, he's raising a problem that is going to grow over time, where things get more and more rational and more mechanical and more controlled and more inhumane. And he's identifying the problem. We'll see it in later literature as well. And we notice it firstly in the conceptual change. When people are wanting to do these things, they start to use vocabulary that will put up a flag that something is happening there, which is the reason I said I object to the word they in reference to a single person. It's a category mistake. A single person cannot be plural. So it should not be said. But as soon as you do that, to avoid he or she and anyone being offended by that, you've created a different problem. You've solved one problem, you've created another problem. You've got rid of individual humanity. That's what you've got rid of. Now you can see people as group, part of a group, but not as individuals. They can be reproduced, same point. But he's going to go on here. Fourthly, the constant breeders, besides the gain of 8 shillings sterling per annum by the sale of their children, will be rid of the charge of maintaining them after the first year. Aha! So they will rise out of the problem of poverty. Remember, the root cause was all financial. Fifthly, this food would likewise bring great custom to taverns, where the vintners will certainly be so prudent as to procure the best receipts for dressing it to perfection. Receipts will be recipes. And consequently have their houses frequented by the fine gentlemen who justly value themselves upon their knowledge in good eating. And a skillful cook who understands how to oblige his guests will contrive to make it as expensive as they please. Sixthly, this would be a great inducement to marriage. Oh, now he's giving the Christian appeal to this. It will encourage marriage, which all wise nations have either encouraged by rewards or enforced by laws and penalties. It would increase the care and tenderness of mothers towards their children when they were sure of a settlement for life to the poor babes, provided in some sort by the public to their annual profit instead of expense. They won't have to worry about the cost of raising their young. It will be financially beneficial. We should soon see an honest emulation among the married women, which of them could bring the fattest child to the market. Like who can bring the biggest pig, win the prize. Men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancy as they are now of their mares in foal, their cows and calf, or sows when they are ready to farrow, nor offer to beat or kick them, as is too frequent a practice, for fear of a miscarriage. This is one of the reasons they have the many miscarriages, because of spousal abuse. But this will solve the problem because they have an investment in this. So it will make them love one another more because they see a commodity. They see one another as commodities. Don't you see the solution to the problem? Is just to regard them as commodities. It solves all the problems. Okay, so the attack here, and I'll I'll skip over the rest of it. But the general thrust of it is an attack on the commodification of people, treating people as objects in a balance sheet. That's what he's really attacking. And he's doing so in language as a clergyman to wealthy gentlemen like himself who are acting in total flagrant contradiction to what they purport to identify them, namely their Christianity. So it is a savage satire. The purpose of the satire is to get them to think about what they are doing. He assumes his audience will be struck by the satire. That's why he writes it. He's not doing it for laughs. So the point is to correct the immorality that's ongoing, not really to propose something that he expects people to genuinely do. He doesn't expect them to start selling babies. He expects them to stop exploiting the Irish peasants. That's what he expects. By drawing an analogy between this and that. The way you're treating the adults is just like what I propose so appallingly you should do to the children. But you're already doing that, so stop it. That's the intent. Okay?